We appreciate y'all coming today. My name is Lang Hornthal, and I'm the co-executive director for EcoForesters. We're a forestry nonprofit based out of Asheville, and we really appreciate y'all coming out, taking time to learn with us on this beautiful Saturday. We couldn't have timed that drive in any better for the leaves, and just this is clearly a beautiful spot worth conserving and protecting and keeping those pesky invasives out of. Today you're going to hear from several speakers about non-native invasive plants and the impacts that they're having on our forests. You'll hear from the North Carolina Extension, you'll hear from the North Carolina Forest Service, as well as EcoForesters, again, to hear more about opportunities for forest landowners and where you can be more active in your forest controlling invasive plants. We'd like to thank Extension and the North Carolina Forest Service for partnering with us to do these free workshops. We're happy to be here. Even though we've got 1 million acres of public land, private landowners own about 70% of the forest land in western North Carolina. There are about 55,000 acres of public lands here in Madison County alone. So if we're going to make a difference and if we're going to keep our forests healthy, private landowners need to be engaged. We need to share resources with them and help them make good decisions and be good stewards of their forest. We consider private landowners the unsung heroes of our region because all the good things we get from healthy forests are because mostly from private landowners, and so we want to encourage them to be good stewards and help them where possible. So thank you for being here and being open to learning more, and we really appreciate it. As I mentioned, we're with EcoForest. We're a nonprofit. Our mission is the conservation and restoration of Appalachian forests that we accomplish through stewardship and education. We do this by helping landowners manage their forest. That means different things to different people. People own land and their forests for different reasons, for different values, but we believe that there are activities and actions that you can do in your forest that would lift up any of those values. Anything we want to help you achieve or recommend is going to be through the lens of what you want to do on your land. And it's just a matter of trying to get you the resources to help you accomplish your vision and in order to leave the legacy of what you want to accomplish and leave your children. We also realize that everyone is here for a little different reason and are in different stages in the forest planning process. Some of you have a forest management plan or are already controlling invasive plants on your property. The goal of this workshop is to help you take your next step. It might be your very first step. It might be your 30th step. But we're trying to help keep momentum moving, and that means different things to different people. So we want to hear from you and what you've been able to accomplish. We have been fortunate to have a great partner in North Carolina Extension on many of our rural community forestry projects. They are an invaluable resource for landowners, and we encourage you to take advantage of and learn from their expertise. So I'd now like to introduce to you Madison County Assistant Extension Agent Peyton Duckett.
So, hi everybody. Like he said, can everybody hear me okay? Okay, good. So, like he said, my name is Peyton Duckett, and I am one of the Cooperative Extension Agents here in Madison County. And today we're going to talk a little bit about what the Cooperative Extension's role is in helping control invasives. So we're going to start a little bit with what is Extension. And Extension, North Carolina Cooperative Extension is the largest non-formal education outreach organization in all of the UNC system, so all 17 campuses of the UNC universities. This is the biggest outreach program. So we serve as a bridge between North Carolinians and our state's preeminent research universities of NC State University and NC University. And you'll see below that right here, you'll see NC State's mission, which is NC State Extension extends research-based knowledge to all North Carolinians, helping them transform science into everyday solutions that improve their lives and grow our state. And NCANT's mission is just a little bit different, but as they are a partnership, we do work toward both goals. Cooperative Extension at NCANT provides research-based information to North Carolinians with social, cultural, and economic barriers to upward mobility so that they can make decisions that improve their communities and their lives. So NC State Extension is located in all 100 counties of North Carolina and the eastern band of the Cherokee. So even if you're not from Madison County, there is an agent in your area, or you're more than welcome to contact me or any other agents that you may be near. So my role at the office is I am the livestock and forages agent, so I am in charge. I can help you formulate plans for animal management, including nutrition, animal health, things like that. I am also, because of forages, can help you with hay and pasture management, whether it's getting rid of invasives in your hay pastures or trying to figure out the best ways to improve the quality of your hay. I'm also the consumer horticulture agent, so I help with your home gardens. I can help diagnose plant diseases, and I can help with removing invasives, which is why I'm here today. I'm also the pesticide coordinator, so I help those of you that may have a pesticide license get your recertification credits so your license doesn't expire, and I can help anyone who's interested in finding chemical control for weeds and invasives find the best control to use in their area. So at Cooperative Extension, this is the top 5 invasive species that we've received contacts about and have helped people try to control. We have miscanthus, kudzu, multiflora roses, bamboo, and Japanese knotweed are the ones that we see the most in my position at the office. So here's just some quick identifying photos of, like, here's a photo of miscanthus along a roadside in Asheville, and then a close-up over here of the seed head, so it can be, and it's pretty easily recognizable when that seed head's up with the really fluffy silvery white seeds. The next one is kudzu, so it's a little bit harder to spot if you don't know exactly what you're looking for. Those seed pods and flowers can really help you determine it with that purplish color. The leaves in the fall the leaves have a pretty distinct yellow color in the fall, but they have a pretty distinct shape most of the time anyway. The multiflora roses, this is a picture of a massive multiflora rose that was found in Haywood County. The leaf arrangement right here is something you can use to easily identify them. They also have these little spines very close to the ends of their leaf stems. Here's a picture of some of the young leaves, and then here's some of the leaves that, as they mature, are starting to turn purple. So all of these are good signs on how to help you identify the multiflora rose, besides just the spines that you see on them most of the time anyway. And then this specific type of bamboo, this golden bamboo, is one that we've been contacted about at the Extension office. And it's, of course, we all know what bamboo looks like. It's relatively easy to identify, but to find this specific kind, you can see that the stems start to turn that kind of orangish color toward the middle as they mature. And they're generally just, and the leaves and the stem itself is generally just a little yellower than most of the other bamboo that you'll see. And then Japanese knotweed, this is an image of a whole plant grouping of it and some young growth right here. When it's in bloom, it has these really upright sort of, not quite flowers, but not quite seed heads either. And then the fruits on them also have a very distinct shape and are very white. And then here's a close-up on the leaves. They're also very easily identifiable because they have joints going up the stem, hence the name knotweed. And then how can Extension help us control them? So if you send us photos, bring us physical samples, or if we come out to your site, we can help you identify exactly which invasive you're dealing with. And then from there, we can spread knowledge to the general communities about this is the one that's in your area. I would keep a watch on this. Here are some ways you can prevent it from spreading into your property. Some IPM planning, so your integrated pest management. So that's just ways that we can attack removing and preventing these invasives with several different methods. Like your physical controls, like cutting it down, mowing it, or your biological controls by maybe introducing something like anybody that's used goats to control kudzu, that's a biological control because they'll eat it. Cultural controls are just the practices that you can do to help prevent them from coming back. And then anyone who's interested then you can also use chemical controls like your herbicides. That is not necessary if you are not interested in using it. We can use these other methods to help control it as well. And then from there, we can help you find aid and resources for removing those invasives, whether it's you want to do it yourself, or if you want to hire a professional or look for those cost share options. NC's Cooperative Extension can help you find those as well. So that's all for me. It's pretty short, sweet, and to the point. If you have any specific questions, you can, or need any help IDing or anything like that, I would suggest stopping by the office one day or giving us a call or shooting me an email right here, and I can help you from there. All right. Thanks.
Hey, everybody. People want to stand up, stretch for a second? Feeling limber? Everybody's feeling froggy this morning? My name's Bo Dossett. I'm the Madison County Ranger for this area. I work for the North Carolina Forest Service, which, just to be clear, is not the U.S. Forest Service. The U.S. Forest Service administers federal land. I work mostly with private landowners, so please don't talk to me about trash on Max Patch. That's not that is not my area of expertise. So North Carolina Forest Service, what we do wildfire control. That's our primary objective, controlling fires on private land. We do forest management plans, landowner education, emergency aid, wildland arson investigations, water quality protection and enforcement of rules around logging, prescribed fire for fuel reduction, and training for our volunteer fire departments in the area. We work really closely with Laurel Fire Department just down the road. So Madison County is 453 square miles. We have a little bit of everything here. About 15% of the county is national forest. And we've got everything from low elevation hardwood forests down in Hot Springs at about 1,500 feet all the way up to Sandy Mush Bald at over 5,000 feet. We've got everything in between. We've got dozens of different forest ecosystems. We've got over 60 species of trees, a lot of diversity, very interesting forests, some that are fire dependent, some that never see fire, some that are heavily invaded with non-native plants, some that are fairly pristine. We've got a little bit of everything here. And I want to talk about the Laurel Valley. How many people, by a show of hands, live in Laurel? Big Laurel, Shelton Laurel? Yeah. So Laurel Valley specifically is a slightly higher part of the county, as you guys know. You guys get a lot more rain than a lot of the rest of us. And you also have a lot more intact forest. Laurel has a lot of larger blocks of intact forest. A larger percentage of it is national forest. There's relatively fewer invasives than there are in places like Marshall and Mars Hill. Larger land parcels as well. It's a really unique part of the county. I really like working up here. But you guys do have invasive species, whether you live in Laurel or really anywhere in western North Carolina. Pretty much every parcel of land in Madison County has at least one invasive species on it. And invasive species are bad because whatever you're managing your forest for, whatever you like about owning forest land, whether you're just in it to make money selling timber, or you're a bird watcher and you just want to watch the birds in the morning, invasive species can negatively affect pretty much all the reasons why humans need forests or why we enjoy owning forested land. So I want to talk a little bit about invasive species. To give you a little bit of background, I got into forestry when I went to college, and I started working for a small consulting forester. Can I take this out of here? I started working for a small consulting forester in the Asheville area, and I didn't really think that much about invasive species. I didn't really know that much about them. But as I think probably a lot of y'all have learned, once you start to see them out there, you kind of can't not see them anymore. And it starts to really burrow into your brain. And I didn't really know what to do about them. But I worked for this guy that he used a lot of herbicide for invasive species control. Now, who here is comfortable using herbicide or has used herbicide before? Can I see a show of hands? Who here is uncomfortable using herbicide? Can I see a show of hands? Who here thinks that like chemicals are kind of weird and we probably spray too many chemicals? Yeah, that's fair. Personally, my grandfather, he was actually an extension agent, and he never met a chemical that he didn't love. By the time he passed, he had a garden that was probably about the size of a postage stamp, and he probably dumped every chemical known to man on his like 4 beets that he had. And I was not like that growing up. I didn't think that was great. I went to Warren Wilson down in Asheville. I worked on several organic farms. Worked for a lot of friends that they didn't use any chemicals at all. I have a big garden at the house. I don't use chemicals on it. But that said, I don't know how to control the invasive species levels that we have in Western North Carolina without at least some chemical usage. And that's just the reality that I have found working in the forest industry over the last about 10 years. And pretty much everyone you talk to that works professionally in the forestry industry will tell you that there's not a really good way around using chemicals. Believe me, if there was, I would be using it. But as far as I can tell, at this time, there's not. And the way that I think about it is that nature is trying to come up with her own solutions to these plants. You know, eventually there will be bugs and stuff that figure out how to eat kudzu or something. You know, the groundhogs are working on it already, but they're probably gonna need some help. But while nature is kind of adapting to all these plants that we've introduced, it's our responsibility to kind of help it out as much as we can. And herbicides are just a tool in that toolbox. Another thing I wanted to talk about, invasive species, they really don't support much. You know, I think a lot of us who are concerned about chemical use, it's because, you know, the trends in native insect biodiversity declines and pollinators and stuff like that. But the reality is a lot of these plants, because they're not adapted to this region, they really don't support much in the way of wildlife at all. There's not a whole lot of stuff that lives in a pampas grass or a miscanthus grass patch. There's a lot of different names for miscanthus. Mars Hill grass. There's not a lot that lives in a Mars Hill grass patch. And that's the reality compared to a native ecosystem with all the biodiversity and all the interlocking web of plants and animals that kind of all depend on each other. And just for an example, this is a statistic about 2 trees. Everyone knows what a ginkgo tree looks like. People like to plant it. Versus one of our native white oaks. So a ginkgo hosts 0 species of native caterpillars. There's no moths, there's no butterflies, there's nothing that eats a ginkgo tree. That's why ginkgo trees have all those really pretty leaves that don't have any bug holes in them. Whereas a white oak hosts 577 species of native caterpillars. And for a lot of people, like, we might not really care about caterpillars, but you might also care about the things that eat those caterpillars, whether they're turkeys or quail or grouse or songbirds. Squirrels eat caterpillars sometimes. That whole web of life kind of starts with insects and other animals eating plants. And realistically, just a lot of the invasives that we have around here, nothing eats them, and that's part of why they're so aggressive. So I want to talk about 2 species that I'm the most concerned about in Madison County, and those are the first of which is Oriental bittersweet. I think a lot of y'all have probably seen it. It's not quite as bad up here in Laurel as it is in some parts of the county. Is anyone here from Sandy Mush? You guys are lucky, because if you're in Sandy Mush, everything's covered in bittersweet. Fairview in Buncombe County is just absolutely eat up with bittersweet. Up here, it's not that bad yet. That said, it is getting worse. Bittersweet, it's spread by birds. It's a little seed that's kind of carried long distances, sometimes for miles, before the bird deposits it, you know. in the middle of the woods somewhere. And it's not that hard to control if you're working on it, but it can spread pretty quickly, and it grows very fast. Oh, also this, just for this picture here is a cutout of a nursery magazine that I found in my house while we were renovating the upstairs, where they were encouraging people to buy Oriental bittersweet because they're so pretty. A lot of people actually, you guys might have seen these where they make wreaths out of them at Christmas time and they sell them in Asheville, and then it gets to be the end of Christmas and people are like, well, done with this, and they kind of like chuck it out behind the house, and then that's how it kind of starts. So a lot of times, I've even seen on Mill Creek, there's actually a really interesting spot where there is a cemetery up there that has a bittersweet infestation, and the biggest vine starts at a place where someone hung a wreath next to a grave. Like, that you can clearly see, like, this is where it started from a wreath, and the little wreath stand is still there, which is kind of crazy. Did you have a question?
How old do you think that ad is?
Sorry?
How old do you think that ad is?
I think it's the 1950s. Yeah. So there's been bittersweet at my house for a while, so I've been working on that for the last few years. This is a picture right across the ridge from my house, probably related, this bittersweet is probably related to that batch that got bought from that magazine. And you can see how bad it can get climbing up and strangling the tree. Fortunately, it is possible to control it. Bittersweet, it can be controlled by mowing. You can kind of dig it up. You can definitely pull up young ones. I pull up young ones all the time when I'm walking through the woods, but for the big vines, by far the best thing to do is use herbicide. We're going to show you guys some methods today of how to use herbicide safely with a very minimal amount of chemical application. This right here is something we're going to talk a lot about. This is called cut stem herbicide application, and you can see that on that, what I did was I just cut that vine. You put a little bit of herbicide on the stem, and it kind of sucks it down into the plant. You're not out there kind of fogging the woods, spraying everything. You're putting a little bit on there, and it kind of draws it down into the root system. So you're not having any off-target effects. You're not spraying the wildflowers next door. You can be very, very targeted with that herbicide. And then I want to talk about the other invasive species that keeps me up at night, not necessarily because I'm up, but because my pager goes off and I have to go work on it, which is pampas grass, also known as Chinese silvergrass, Mars hill grass, cemetery grass, wildfire grass, golden gas. We got a lot of different names for it. I think anyone that's driven down I-26 or driven through Mars Hill is probably familiar with it. Did you have a question? Everyone here has seen pampas grass? Has anyone here seen it on fire? Yeah. It'll really do something. And in Madison County, the presence of pampas grass is the single biggest indicator, of future wildfire activity. In Madison County, most of the pampas grass is located in Mars Hill along the 213 corridor. There's starting to be some on I-26, there's starting to be some on Big Laurel, and pretty much if you map out where the pampas grass is in Madison County and where we have wildfires, it is like a one-to-one, pretty much. Mars Hill, the Mars Hill Fire District, we have 11 fire districts in Madison County. Mars Hill runs approximately 60 to 80% of our wildfires in the county, just because of this stuff. I've seen it burn in the rain. I have not seen it burn in the snow, but I've seen pictures of it burning in the snow. It'll burn in the summertime, it'll burn in the winter, the fall, spring. It's kind of a perennial problem. It'll burn all the time. In 2021, 80% of Madison's fires were in the Mars Hill Fire District, and Buncombe County ran 55 fires to Madison's 60. I want to talk about that real quick because Buncombe County has 10 times our population. Like, if we ran 80% of our fires in Mars Hill Fire District, that means just the town of Mars Hill is running almost as many wildfires as all of Buncombe County, with whatever they have, 500,000 people down there. Madison County ran more fires than Yancey, Mitchell, and Transylvania County combined. Almost all that's just due to Mars Hill. And 78% of Madison's fires occurred in the Mars Hill Fire District in 2022. That was 65 fires. Buncombe County beat us that year, but not by that much. Madison ran only 2 fires less than Yancey, Mitchell, and Transylvania County put together. What I'm trying to get at with this is basically just because of the presence of pampas grass in our county, Madison County punches way above its weight in terms of our wildfire occurrence, just because of the presence of pampas grass. And that's kind of what we're getting at today with what can happen when you have an invasive that just spreads uncontrolled across a whole landscape. Once you have invasive species at a landscape level, it totally changes the ecology in ways that are almost irreversible. Someone else have a question?
I don't want to get ahead of you, but do I understand that fire doesn't stop it, that once you have a fire, it comes back next year and so forth?
Fire just makes it angry. You know, like that scene in Jaws where they're like, "Did we kill it?" And he's like, "No, we just made it angry." Like that's what happens when you burn. It gets worse. Yeah, it will reseed more thickly after it's burned. This is a picture of what it looks like 3 months later, and you can see how much of the canopy of this tree was burned off. The fire was hot enough that it killed basically everything except for the very top of that tree. And it killed pretty much everything in there except for the pampas grass, of course.
It just made it angry.
It just made it angry. And that's the field 3 months later. You can see that's basically a monoculture now. Mortality caused by the fire at the top of the field, where pampas grass expands up into the newly opened field. As the canopy dies, pampas grass spreads upward and the field gets bigger. And thick roadside regrowth, ready to burn again next year. So the current situation, pampas grass is spreading into the Laurel Valley, mostly along roads and power line right-of-ways. Still in the early stages of invasion in Shelton, Laurel, and Sodom. Big Laurel's starting to get pretty bad. We had a big fire in Big Laurel this spring that started in a pampas grass on a power line. It's very hard to control once it's at that stage, but small individual clusters can be controlled. The big takeaways from this presentation, though, if you guys own land in Laurel or anywhere else in Madison County, learn what invasives you have on your property and take steps to reduce their impact on your forest. Obviously, I've been talking about some extreme examples, but there's a whole range of invasives that can all have negative effects on our landscape. And also, we can write you a free practice plan that will just identify all the invasives you have and tell you what steps you can take to get rid of them. And I have a sign-up sheet in the back for anybody that is interested in that. And that's all I've got.
Thank you, Bo. That was a great presentation there, some local stuff here. So I'm going to talk to you about really why it's important, bigger picture, to do some stewardship, to take care of your forests. And there are ways that you can get some funding to help you take care of your forests, because we know treating invasive plants is hard work or costs money to pay someone to do it. So there's really good resources out there, and to help you get access to these resources so you can be a good steward of your forest is my goal here. I'm talking about money. So real quick, the reason it's important to understand where we've been and how we got here. These are American chestnuts. They were the redwoods of the East, enormous trees. They were a quarter of the forest around here. Massive trees, incredible value for wildlife and humans, for food and timber. Now they're all gone in the blink of an eye, okay? So we lost the chestnuts. We had Dutch elm disease, knocked back the elms. We had the balsam woolly adelgid, knocked back the Fraser fir trees. The hemlock woolly adelgid has now decimated our hemlock trees. Emerald ash borer is now eliminating our ash trees currently. And we now have the spongy moth in North Carolina, which further threatens oak trees, which are already at risk. And the one picture here I want to point to you, this is why you want a diverse forest. diverse forests can actually resist the invasion of invasive plants better. The wider variety of species you have, the better they are to resist and be resilient and keep functioning from some invasive plants coming in. So a more diverse forest is a healthier forest. And this was a street in Toledo. They wanted all their trees to match. They planted ash trees along both sides of their streets. It looked beautiful in 2006. And when ash borer came through and poof, every single one of those trees all died because it was all one species. You don't want to have a monoculture in your forest. You want to try and create a diverse forest. That's one of the things you want to manage for, because that will help the forest resist and be resilient to all kinds of forest health challenges, invasive plants or climate change, whatever else is coming at it. Another big thing is, for the past 13,000 years there have been very regular fires in our forests, as far as we know, maybe even back farther than that. Now, about 100 years ago, there were some bad forest fires. They decided that forest fires were bad, and they've since had a policy of suppressing fires for the past 100 years. And they finally realized that, you know what? The fires were actually really good in our natural native forests that were adapted to them, the higher, drier oak and yellow pine forests. Fires were doing a good thing. They were thinning out that dense understory, which opened it up more for wildlife. Fresh regrowth came in, helped out oaks and yellow pines. It really was a good thing for our forests. Now with, pampas grass around, it's not so good anymore in those places. But fire can be a really good thing to do in the right place, under the right conditions for things. But that has not happened. That has really changed our forests and made them lower quality in general. Very dense, thick things are not good for everything, certainly. The other thing is, if you're doing a timber harvest, if you call up the local logger or call up the local mill and have them come out and harvest your forest, they will say, okay, we'll do a diameter limit cut. We'll buy all your trees that are above about 16 inches in diameter. If you can't hug them, they're that big, then they have timber value. They'll buy those trees, and they'll cut just those nice big trees and leave all the smaller trees. Well, it turns out, because of massive clear cutting that happened here 100 years ago, all the trees in the forest are pretty much the same age. Those really big trees just grew faster, had better genetics, were better adapted to that site, and the smaller trees are just as old. They just didn't grow as well, they aren't as healthy, as vigorous, so you're removing the best trees and those genetics from your forest by doing this diameter limit cut or this high-grade harvest. They even say, oh, it's a selective harvest. They're being selective for the biggest and best ones. So this timber harvesting has left behind a vastly degraded forest. You left behind trees that are smaller, slower growing, less vigorous, less healthy, and they often get damaged when you're felling the really big trees, the little trees get damaged. So it's a much reduced forest quality we're seeing due to this common timber practice. So if you are even thinking about having a timber harvest, please call the State Forest Service, a consulting forester, call us. We can come out, give you a free consult to make sure your timber harvest is sustainable. Timber harvesting can be done well. It can be done sustainably. I've seen that happen, and it can be done with some poor practices that do not benefit the forest at all, do the exact opposite to it. So poor timber harvesting, this has gone on for the past century pretty much, has really reduced the quality of our forests. Other thing that I'm really glad that Bo showed that slide of how many caterpillars an oak tree can support, because those big, fat, juicy caterpillars are what birds essentially need to feed their young. And so oaks are a hot spot for wildlife. Oaks are the keystone species for wildlife. The insects for all the birds and little critters, and the acorns, everything from birds up to bears eats the acorns. That's the really good, nutritious food source. It's been around. We don't have chestnuts anymore. We have acorns, are a great, great food source. But oaks have been declining due to things like lack of fire, because oaks are fire adapted and actually benefit from fire. They can't regenerate. So right now, this is in an oak forest, we have nice, big, healthy oaks still. But if you look in the understory of an oak forest, you'll find there are not little oak saplings coming up. They can't regenerate in these dense, thick, shady, moister conditions. Oaks like it drier and hotter. That's where they compete better, need more sun. They don't have enough sun, there's too much moisture. The maples and the poplars take over, and as time passes on, this is going to be our future forest. What we have in these little saplings, maples are starting to replace the oaks. And again, oaks are the keystone species for wildlife. So we really want to make sure we are managing our forests for oaks. There's lots of benefits. Also great saw timber, beautiful tree, very long lived, stores tons of carbon for a long time, good for climate change. It's resistant to climate change too, because it's drought tolerant, it's heat tolerant, it's fire tolerant. All of those things are going to increase with climate change. So oaks are really a keystone species for a lot of ways. So you want to manage your forest for oaks as well. If you have oaks, you can manage for them to help them. So challenges to forest stewardship, like I said, it either takes a lot of time and hard work and or it takes some money to pay someone to do it. So funding's really important. Non-native invasive plants would be the focus here today. That needs to be addressed to have a healthy forest for any value you have, whether it's timber, wildlife, just aesthetics, recreation. You know, some of those thickets you can't even walk through, they're so bad with invasives. Sometimes you'll see this in the woods, a real dense thicket of green. I was walking on an owner's property yesterday, and it was a beautiful forest, walking through, and all of a sudden I said, uh-oh. I looked across the way, about 100 yards to the forest, I could just see this giant, dense, thick patch of green vegetation. And I said, you know what? That's probably non-native invasive vegetation. Nothing else grows that thick. And sure enough, when we got closer to it, it was all Chinese wisteria. It was an old home site there, had been planted, and now it was a giant thicket of wisteria. So, invasives are essential things to watch out for out there. I haven't talked about climate change, but climate change is going to be affecting our forests too. We need to manage our forests for climate change, to prepare them for the hotter, drier, droughtier, more fire future that is being predicted for us. In the past, mismanagement, we talked about that high grading that goes on. We've lost those 5 species, chestnut, the Dutch elm, the emerald ash borer, the hemlocks. There's 5 species that have pretty much been eliminated from our forests, or at least functionally eliminated. So we have a less diverse forest, less high quality forest. We have to take some active steps now to restore our forests and get them back so they are healthier and more resilient and have greater values for all the values we have for us. It's just the simple beauty of them. So, the need for restoration. My dad said he used to manage by benign neglect and just let nature take care of itself. And that was great, 100 years ago or more, maybe even 50 years ago. But now, with non-native invasive plants, fire suppression, talked about past poor management, development pressure, so much going on, it's not working anymore. We've introduced too many things, made too many changes, climate change in there, where nature is not taking care of itself anymore. Nature needs our help now to undo some of the things that humans have done over the past couple hundred years. In particular, if you have non-native invasive plants on your property and you do nothing, what's going to happen? They're going to get worse. They're not going away on their own. Nature's not taking care of them anytime soon. Evolution takes thousands or even millions of years to adapt and have that control happen. We don't have that time to waste. So you have to take care of invasive plants. If you have them, if you don't do nothing, they'll get worse. If you have an oak forest on your property and you do nothing, what's going to happen? In that last slide I showed you, the oaks, as they start dying out in the coming decades, are going to be replaced with other trees. And the forest is going to have less value for wildlife and timber, other things. You're going to lose your oaks if you don't take some actions. It doesn't have to happen like immediately today, but over the next 10 years, start looking at what you could do to help restore your oak forest so it will be an oak forest in the future too. There is cost share funding for these things. If you make a plan, we can help you, the forester can help you, a lot of people can help you make a plan and then implement the plan and get you some funding to help implement the plan so your forest is being improved. That's called forest stand improvement work. Things like invasive species control is forest stand improvement work. And also you can do some work to thin out the forest to benefit oaks and hickories and yellow pines, those real keystone species, and increase the growth and vigor and health of your forest so that you have the forest you want in the future by doing some of these improvement treatments. And it also can really improve and you can create whole new wildlife habitat out there by doing some of this management out there and get a greater diversity of wildlife and a greater abundance of wildlife on your property, both wildlife and for plants as well. All kinds of plants from trees down to little wildflowers can benefit from having these treatments done out there to mix up some different structure. There's both the species diversity, which is very important, and the structural diversity. We don't have very many big trees left. They were all cut. So you want to keep some big trees on your property. But we also don't have very many areas that are regenerating with young, healthy forests. And we need both those things, as well as we have a lot of what's kind of middle-aged forests now out there. All those structures are important. So, some things we recommend. Turns out fire is really good in the right place, in the right time. Prescribed burning for a forest is really good. To restore oak likes that, wildlife like fire, yellow pines, those drier places, drier forest types. evolved for thousands of years at least to have regular fire. The State Forest Service can do prescribed burning for you. You can talk to Bo about that. Also back there, Prescribed Burn Association, Zach back there. If you want to talk about volunteer networks of landowners burning their property together for benefit, they can work with you as well. But fire is a good thing that can be done on the property. You have to be committed to it. You can't just do it once. You have to do it at least 3, 4, 5 times to really see the benefit of it out there. So it is a significant commitment to do that, but there are options out there. Fire is not always feasible for everyone. So there are things that we can do that mimic the natural effects of fire. Take a very dense forest, and again, that's so dense and shady that oaks cannot grow and compete there. It's too dense, too moist, too shady. This is an oak forest. What we do is go in and call a mid-story reduction or a low shade reduction and cut out a lot of that dense, thick understory. When the first settlers came through here, 200, 300 years ago, they talked about riding their horses through the woods, 2 and 3 abreast. And there's plenty of places where you can't even walk through the woods because it's so thick now. And that's, the absence of fire is a big part of that. But burning again, it's hard to do, and no one wants to burn the forest, but there are other things you can do that'll mimic the effects and give some more sun down to the forest floor, create a little drier and sunnier conditions, and that allows the oaks to regenerate. And you get these young oak saplings that can then be your future forest. And the oaks do start dying. Or if you're doing oak timber, if you're harvesting oak, you really have to do some work ahead of time to culture that advanced oak regeneration so that when you do harvest your oaks, you will have young oaks ready to come up and replace them and be your next forest. If you don't do this work first, you will not get, if you cut down your oak trees without having done some work first, you probably will not get oaks coming back in their place, unfortunately, in most places. Sometimes you get lucky, but usually not. So this is a really important thing to do to reduce competition from oaks. We also can work on the overstory. You may go into a forest and sometimes there's, lots of poplars or lots of pines. We can go in there and actually selectively choose, maybe we should kill girdle, cut some of these poplars to release and give more space to the oaks that are beside them or underneath them. They need more sun, more space. They don't grow as fast as the poplars or as fast as the white pine. Those are the 2 fastest growing trees, and they'll take over a lot of places. So we can cut some of those out or just girdle them, which creates a dead standing tree, a snag, which is really good for wildlife, and also then releases the other more desirable trees that need our help, like oak, hickory, and yellow pines, like shortleaf pine and pitch pine are the 2 that are particularly good that also need some help that used to be very common but aren't anymore. So those are the things we can do. All those things, again, take time and or money. So how can you get financial help with these things? The first thing is you need to have a plan. You need to have a forest stewardship plan created for your property. And again, once you get this plan created, then you can access a bunch of these programs. The North Carolina Forestry Present Use Value Program can give you major tax savings on your forest land. Talk about that. The U.S. Department of Agriculture's Natural Resource Conservation Service has an EQIP program that will give you cost share funding to pay part of the cost of doing invasives control or doing some of that other forest and improvement work to thin out your forest to make it healthier. And then the North Carolina Forest Service, and you can talk to Bo about this, they have a program called the Forest Development Program that also allows you some funding to do that. And EcoForesters, we also have some funding that we can bring to help you access these programs and get a plan for your property. So please contact us or one of these groups, or you can contact other foresters too. Other foresters can do this work for you as well. There's lots of options out there. We talk about these programs each year. The Present Use Value Program for forestry can give you major property tax savings. I'm not sure exactly the property values out here, but my guess is they're probably somewhere around $2,000 an acre at least. And if you're managing your land for timber, the most you can make is maybe $500 a year, usually less than that per acre. So if you commit to being in this program and manage your land for timber, they'll tax you at that rate. So it'll drop your taxable value of your property to less than $500 per acre. To do this, you have to have at least 20 acres of forest. You have to have owned the property for at least 4 years or live on the property. And you have to have a forest management plan, and that has to include some sustainable timber harvesting. You don't have to clear cut your property, but you do have to do some timber harvesting as part of that program there. It's a voluntary program. You can stay in it as long as you want. If you choose to go out of it, you would have to repay 3 years of back tax savings that you had got from the program if you leave the program. So that's the Forestry Present Use Value Program, major property tax savings, depending upon your land values, but it's a great program. Again, you don't have to clear cut your property. There are lots of options we can do. EcoForesters kind of specializes in ecological timber harvesting, where it's not clear cutting, it's not cutting all the big trees. We're leaving some big trees out there. We're creating areas that are opened up for young, healthy trees to regrow. And we're creating a whole bunch of different structures out there in your forest. The trees aren't all the same age. We're mixing it up and creating a whole diverse forest for you out there through this ecological timber harvesting is a possibility. All right, so things that can be funded: invasive species control, thinning your forest, talked about that for oaks or wildlife, and then creating that early successional habitat, which is young forest. And to create young forest, you have to cut down some trees to allow the young forest to regrow in a healthy place. And that's actually an important structural part, to have young forest. Lots of animals, Bo mentioned grouse and quail and turkeys, all those animals need that young forest, those dense young stands that are thick to raise their young in. And other animals, deer and other animals, like to have those areas as well, some little clearings in the woods for things. So, NRCS Equip program, again, you have to get your property registered through them. It's a federal program. There is some paperwork. Deadline is November 3, which is in like 2 weeks or so. So if you want to get into this program, you have to have a plan. It may be hard to get a plan this late, but you can talk to the agency, get some advice from them. Every county has an agent also for this program. And when you have a forester write a plan for you, they will give at least partial funding. And it's about, they estimate it's about half of the average cost of doing the practice. But that cost, if you have invasives, you might have a very above average invasive infestation. It might cost a lot more than that. It might not be as much. That client I talked to yesterday, it'd probably only cover maybe 10% of the cost of her invasive because she had a severe infestation. It depends on things. But you also have to apply for multiple practices to get funding. So if you just apply to do invasive control, you probably will not get funded. But if you do invasive control and you also do some of that forest thinning we talked about to create better habitat for oaks, you 2 practices, now you almost certainly will get this partial funding for things, okay? It does require an investment from the landowner. You actually can do the work yourself. If you want to not pay someone to do it, you can do it yourself. They'll actually pay you for doing the work yourself as well. The state has a similar program. The Forest Development Program doesn't have as many practices or pay quite as well. It tends to be focused more on reforestation, on planting things afterwards. But you can talk to Bo about that if you're interested in that program. That deadline isn't until May, so you have more time to apply for that one if you want to get ready for that. You also need a plan for that, and the state has to come out there and look at your property to approve that. Same is true for the federal program, the EQIP program. They both require the government agent to come out and look at your property and approve it. Other options. If you never want to harvest timber at all from your property, but you still want to look at getting a tax break, there is the North Carolina Wildlife Land Conservation Program, which will give you the agricultural present use value tax break, which taxes your land at about, again, I'm very rough here, it's up to the state, about $1,000 per acre they'll assess your property at for taxing purposes. You do have to have some kind of priority wildlife habitat. So the 2 main things that qualify are stream sides, up to 300 feet away from a stream, or rock outcrops would qualify. And up to 200 acres can be put in this program if you have that. But you have to have, again, it has to be at least 20 acres of forest or other natural areas, not lawns, not agricultural fields, but natural areas can qualify for that. And the state, as Bo mentioned, they can do controlled burns for you, possibly for free, but it can be a long wait to get that burn to happen on your property. They can write plans for you. They also, if you do have a plan written for you, they actually have the basic timber management plan, or you can get a forest stewardship plan written from them. And I highly recommend, if you want something more comprehensive that talks about wildlife and other things, those stewardship plans are really good too. They can get you done as well. And they're the ones that oversee water quality for timber harvesting. I'm not going to say a lot about this because the carbon markets, carbon sequestration markets are rapidly evolving and changing almost every day. But if you have at least 40 acres of forest and you're willing to commit for the next 40 years not to reduce the amount of carbon in your forest, then you can get paid. I think the last prices I heard were somewhere around $10 to maybe $15 per acre per year. But again, this could change tomorrow. The market could drop and it could go down to $5 an acre. It could go up. No one knows. It's kind of a crazy thing out there. But there are some programs that actually will pay landowners to manage their forest, to store carbon on their forest. That's another option. And those 2 are the ones, mainly I know the finite or core carbon and the forest carbon works are the 2 that are active out there now. And hopefully there'll be some other programs coming in soon out there. So that's my bit as to why you should manage your forest and how we can help get you funding to manage your forest. Oh, good, an invasive plant just fell down.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Christian Caro, and I am the Stewardship Director for EcoForesters. So part of my role is I manage our forest restoration crew. So those folks are the boots on the ground part of our organization. They're out there in the woods, like all of y'all, controlling and managing for, a lot of times, invasive plant species or doing forest stand improvement work. So I really appreciate their efforts as well as all of yours to just keep fighting the good fight against non-native invasive species. So today I'm going to be talking to y'all about a few different plant species that we have here in Western North Carolina. I tried to select species that haven't been talked about yet, but I would be remiss if I didn't talk again about Asiatic, also known as Oriental bittersweet, because that's one that we deal with all the time, and I figured it was one that y'all might be dealing with a lot as well. So I'm going to be talking about Asiatic bittersweet, princess tree, tree of heaven, porcelain berry, and Chinese privet. And I'm also going to be talking about some ways that you can manage or control these species yourselves. I am going to be talking about herbicide use because that, as Bo mentioned, is one of the better tools that we have in our arsenal right now. So myself and my crew, we use these tactics. They're not the correct method for everybody, but maybe they will work for you and the species that you've got on your property. So the first one I want to talk about is, again, Asiatic bittersweet. Joey, would you mind holding up some of those bigger ones? Yeah, there we go. So Asiatic bittersweet, that's the behemoth, that's the mother vine. One of our staff members aged that one several years ago, counted the rings in it just like you would a tree, and that one's, what, Joey, 52 years old? Yep. So she was hanging out in the woods for a while. Yes, yep. That one, I believe, was from Buncombe County property. So Asiatic bittersweet is a shade-tolerant twining vine. It can carpet the understory, but it can also climb up into mature trees and strangle them. They twine, they act a lot like a boa constrictor, and the mature trees, the mature vines that you're finding up in the canopy, they're gonna be producing the most berries, which they have this time of the year. The berries are gonna be bright red, and they're gonna have a yellow sheath or yellow wings that encapsulate the berries before they're ready to drop. As I mentioned, this is a shade-tolerant species, but it really explodes in the sunshine, and it will grow quickly and aggressively and produce a ton of seed. As it ages, the bark of the vine is going to get a lot more rough and ridged and furrowed, but when they're young, they can be kind of nondescript, but they'll have some speckling on the young bark. Those are called lenticels. They're just little dots. They're gas exchange pores, and the bumps, the speckling will get more and more pronounced as that vine ages. When they've got leaves on, they are round to elliptic to ovate. The leaf shape kind of varies, and the shade of green varies throughout the year, or it varies based on how much sun or shade it gets. Sometimes the leaf ends are going to have a little point on it, like a teardrop, but the leaf edges, aka the margins, are always going to be kind of rough and serrated. They're going to have dangling clusters of yellow-green flowers, kind of nondescript, that appear in May or June, and then eventually they will turn into those fruits in the fall. Any questions about bittersweet identification before I move on to the next one? No? All righty. The next one I want to talk about is called princess tree, aka Paulownia. I'm sure y'all have seen it growing along the highways. In the early spring, it's going to have showy violet-colored bell-shaped flowers before it puts on leaves. But when it does put on leaves, they're very large and heart-shaped. They kind of look like an elephant's ear. They're fuzzy on both sides, top and bottom. These trees can reach heights of 60 feet. The wood is really low quality. It's soft. They're one of my favorite trees to girdle because the hatchet goes in like butter. Sadly, the one little capsule can produce 1,000 seeds, and they're wind dispersed, and they can be dispersed up to 2 miles away. These trees love disturbance, so if you see an area that's been recently logged or if a fire has ripped through, princess tree loves that kind of environment. The bark is, in general, pretty smooth. If you run your hand along it, it's going to have some texture to it and be a little bit bumpy, but it's not going to be very deeply furrowed like some of our tree species. But it is kind of dark in color, and it's going to have light squiggles separating some of that dark coloring. So that's princess tree. It's usually always going to have an arch to its main bole of the tree. They don't go straight. They're always kind of bending over in the woods. And there's a photo there of the seed capsules, which are kind of like pecan-like. And you'll see them in the dormant season still hanging on to those seed capsules. But it's a sure sign that you've got princess tree if you scan out into the woods and you see some of those giant leaves. The only lookalikes that I can think of would be like catalpa or maybe basswoods, but they're still not going to have those really showy seed capsules or the showy purple flowers in the spring. Got another tree species here for you. This one's called Tree of Heaven, or Ailanthus is the genus. This tree can reach heights of 80 feet, and its leaves are long and pinnately compound. So all of the little leaflets that you see are a part of one single leaf. So a leaf can have 18 to almost 40 leaflets on it. The leaflets, the margins or the edges are going to be smooth except for a couple of nodes or lobes at the base of each leaflet. If you've ever smelled an ailanthus, then you know they've got a kind of stinky, nutty peanut butter scent to them. Another great characteristic for identifying them in the dormant season are the very pronounced bud scars. They are huge. You can see the bud scars there next to my thumb in that photo. Some common lookalikes could include sumac or black walnut, but both of those native species are going to have serrated leaf edges. They're not going to have that stinky peanut butter smell. Tree of Heaven also loves to sucker sprout, maybe even to a worse degree than the Paulownia does. But we'll talk about how you can combat that sucker sprouting. Also very fast growers. They produce a lot of seed. A single mature Tree of Heaven can produce up to 300,000 seeds. The next species I want to talk about is another woody vine species, and that's porcelain berry. It does really have striking berries this time of year. They're really cool colors, and I understand why people planted them a long time ago because they are cool to look at. They can be confused with our native grape, but I've got a side-by-side there of the bark. So grape is going to be a lot darker in color, and the bark is going to peel easily and come off in strips, whereas the porcelain berry, although it's still going to be textured, it's usually not quite as dark as grape, and it's not going to be as peely. Leaves are not always the best characteristics to rely on for identifying porcelain berry versus native grape. Porcelain berry leaves can have really deep lobes and sinuses, but sometimes that depends on where it's growing. If it has ample sunlight, then maybe it's reduced its leaf surface area. So even if it doesn't have berries, one of my favorite identifying characteristics is the shape of the flowers. Even if it doesn't have flowers currently on, it can have the remnants of old flowers. So the types of flowers that grow on porcelain berry are what's called an umbel, kind of like Queen Anne's lace. So it's a cluster of flowers that are flat-topped and they are pointing upwards, whereas grape, before they have their actual fruiting grapes on, their flowers dangle as as grapes would when they eventually form that fruiting body. So the flowers and the berries are really good characteristics, but if you see it enough and you can get a side-by-side comparison, you can really tell the difference between the bark on grape and the bark on porcelain berry. It is a deciduous vine, so it's gonna lose its leaves here soon, come dormant season, but much like a lot of our other invasive vine species, it's gonna drape itself over mature trees and smother them and bring down branches and limbs, and it has the ability to become a monoculture. Even if it doesn't have trees to climb, it'll mound up over shrubs and across the ground if it's got access to lots of sun. The next plant I want to talk about is a semi-evergreen to evergreen invasive shrub called Chinese privet. We've got a big example of the bark up here on the table. It's got pretty smooth, gray, nondescript bark. Sometimes it'll be splotchy with like lichen patches on it, but it's very smooth. The wood is very hard and very dense. It dulls a chainsaw extremely quickly. It's classified as a shrub, but I've seen some that I would classify as a tree. They can get huge, and they are often multi-stemmed, so that makes control kind of difficult. But when it's fruiting, which is this time of the year, it's got dark purple berries. The leaves are arranged oppositely, directly across from each other, and they're spoon-shaped. They're shaped oval, and they've got a very prominent mid-vein. They're glossy, and the upper surface of the leaves are usually shiny, and they make control difficult, which I'll talk about later. But they are often used as a hedge. They're still being sold at Lowe's and Home Depot, so I encourage you to pick a nicer native alternative. But privet, what else did I want to say about it? It's known to stump sprout as well, so if you're just cutting it, that will not get the job done. It will quickly resprout and come back with a vengeance. Any questions about Chinese privet? No? All right. So I'm going to talk about 3 different common herbicide control methods that myself and my crew utilizes to combat some of these non-native invasive plant species. So one thing I want to talk about before you're ever considering using herbicide as a tool to combat your non-native invasive species, it's really important that you do read the label and you research whatever product it is that you are planning to use. Have a plan, know your target species, make sure that you've got the tools that you need and the proper PPE, that stands for personal protective equipment. Also, the label is the law. I know that sounds stuffy and bureaucratic, but all the products that are put out there are managed by the Environmental Protection Agency, so you do need to read that label and follow that label to be in accordance with the law. But more so than that, it contains a lot of really important information that's going to keep you and the environment safe. So it's going to come with mixing instructions, what kind of species you can treat, first aid instructions in case an emergency happens, important contact information, mixing, loading, handling instructions. All really important stuff. They're not the most riveting read, but it is really important stuff. So please do read the label before you go out so that you know what you should be using. So the first control method that I want to talk about is foliar spraying. So for me and my crew, that means that we're typically using backpack sprayers. And when I say foliage, I'm referring to the leaves of the plant. So typically with a foliar spray, you're going to use water as the carrier, and you're mixing in a really small amount of the herbicide depending on the species that you're treating. So for me and my crew, we're usually mixing 0.5% to up to 5%, depending on the chemical, depending on the species, but it's a very low amount of the actual herbicide that's going into solution with water. I also like to use a non-ionic surfactant. That is basically an additive that you are adding into your spray mixture, and it's helping the solution adhere and stick to the leaves and sometimes more readily penetrate the leaf's cuticle. Species like privet, English ivy have a very thick and waxy cuticle, so a surfactant is really going to go a long way to make that solution stick to the leaves and break down that cuticle and make the herbicide work. I also like to use an indicator dye with my crew so that you can see where you've sprayed and know where to pick up if you go on lunch or if you switch to a different area. It's really important that you are using measuring cups and having all your PPE when you are mixing this stuff, because that's the most dangerous time when you're using herbicides. So please make sure you're wearing your PPE and you're measuring what you're going to use properly. When it comes to actually spraying the plant in question, you want to make sure that you're getting 80% or greater coverage of the green growing parts of the plant. So that doesn't mean with foliar spraying that you need to spray the stems, but the leaves should be green and actively growing, and you want to get good coverage so that surface is looking wet, not so far to the point that it's like really running off and dripping, but a good wet surface area. With the backpack sprayers that we use, we can adjust the nozzle size to a stream or more of a fan or a cone. If you are working with something like kudzu, where it's just a monoculture, maybe you're not too worried about having a wider cone because that's all there is. So you're just spraying the kudzu. But if you're spraying something that you want to be a little bit more targeted because you've got lots of other nice native plants close by, then maybe you want to adjust your nozzle to less of a fine mist and more of a targeted stream. When you're adjusting your nozzle to a stream setting, that means that the droplet size is going to be larger. So it's heavier and it's less likely to be carried away by wind, and then we can prevent accidental drift. Another thing I didn't mention earlier, but the know before you go, always check the weather. If it's going to be too windy, maybe today's not the day to do foliar spraying. If there's going to be rain predicted in the next 24 hours, maybe it's not the day to do foliar spraying, because oftentimes you want these foliar sprays to have at least a couple of hours to dry. I think that's what I want to talk about with foliar spraying, but I'm happy to go with questions. Yeah.
What's the season for spraying? Are we past the spraying time now?
So we're getting there for a lot of species. Once some of the species have like started to yellow and the leaves have senesced, they're no longer like having live tissue that's going to take that herbicide down to the root system. But something like privet or English ivy or winter creeper, these species that are evergreen to semi-evergreen, we can still foliar spray treat those. But a good rule of thumb is typically May through mid-October. Some species can go a little earlier. Multiflora rose leaves out as early as March. Another thing I thought of, so when it comes to foliar spraying, what I tell my crew is we are not trying to spray overhead. So, and that's to protect themselves, but also surrounding vegetation. So if something's getting to be up in height that's 5 feet or greater and you're having to point up, then it probably needs a different tactic, like maybe cut stump or hack and squirt, which we'll be talking about. But foliar spraying I tend to use for low growing plants that are carpeting the ground or that are shorter than 5 feet in height. These next couple of methods are called hack and squirt and cut stem or cut stump. So hack and squirt is a kind of stem injection application method. It involves applying a concentrated herbicide solution to the inner bark of a invasive woody tree or shrub. So that involves using a tool like a hatchet or a machete to make downward incisions through the bark and into that cambium layer, which is just the little layer right after the bark. And once you break through that cambium layer, you want to apply that concentrated herbicide solution into that fresh cut so that it can take it down to its root system. If you're using a hatchet for this kind of method, you want to make sure that you're not doing a cut and then cutting right below it, because then you've damaged that tissue where it would have sucked the herbicide down. So you want to make your cuts all in the same plane around the bole of the tree. I recommend spraying that herbicide in quickly. Like Bo mentioned, there's a suction component here, so you don't want to leave it too long without applying that herbicide. Now, I mentioned that with foliar spraying, it's pretty low % solution. With cut stump applications or hack and squirt, it's going to be a little bit higher concentration. We use 25 to 50% herbicide, oftentimes mixed with water as the carrier. I still like to use blue, so you can see blue dye to see where you've been. For Tree of Heaven, I mentioned that it is a species that is prone to root suckering. So with that one, we do a hack and squirt application where we're leaving an inch of tissue in between each cut. In a way, it's kind of to trick the tree so that it dies more slowly, but it also is meant to lessen the chance for it to root sucker so vigorously. If we were to completely girdle a Tree of Heaven or to just cut it down, that Tree of Heaven knows, like, oh, I'm in trouble. It's time to send my energies to my roots, and that's when the root suckering happens. A really good time of year to do hack and squirt treatment is right now, when all the plants are getting ready for dormancy. They're actively sucking their energies down to their root system, and so too will they readily carry that herbicide with them. It's a good time of the year to do it, but you can do hack and squirt treatment throughout most of the year. I would say, with exception to if you've had really prolonged cold weather, that's just gonna impact the absorption rate if it's been too cold. But then also in early spring, when there's a high sap flow, the trees are getting ready for growing season. So they're sending all their energies and resources upward. So that sap could push out the herbicide, and it's just not as effective. I like to treat around the tree in the lower, like 1 to 2 foot within soil level, just closer to the ground. But I still like to leave some space between my line of cuts in case you come back and it hasn't completely died. Then you've got some space underneath to give it a few more whacks if you come back a couple of months later and it still hasn't died. And then with cut stump application, the photos I've got here, the crew is working on bittersweet. I think Bo mentioned there were some photos that he had earlier with some cut stump applications. So this involves using some kind of hand tool or chainsaw to sever that woody plant close to soil level at the base, and then you're again going to apply a concentrated herbicide solution to that freshly cut surface area. The bigger the plant you have that you're treating, the less need you have to treat in the middle of it, in that heartwood, which is already died. But it's really important to get that outer circumference, that cambium layer right behind the bark. That's where you especially want to target, because that's where the plant is still living and it's actively transporting water and nutrients up and down, and so too it will take that herbicide with it. Not required, but if you're working on invasive vines and if you have a particularly bad infestation and you're going back time and time again to treat it, I also like to cut them at eye level. So then it's an easy, you can see, okay, that area is done. I cut it at eye level, and then I cut it at soil level as well, and I treated it with that concentrated herbicide solution. Really important to make sure that you do treat that stump within a couple of minutes to making that cut. And to also make sure that it is low enough. I think I mentioned Chinese privet has an incredible ability to re-sprout, even sometimes if you have used herbicide. And I've seen that mostly if somebody has cut them too high. So my rule of thumb is 6 inches or lower. And with privet and multiflora rose, autumn olive, burning bush, those are all species that once I've cut them for a cut stump application and I've sprayed that stump, for good measure, I spray the other end of that piece of the plant that, you know, you'd think like, okay, it's dead now, toss it away. But if it's laying on the ground and it has access to moisture, I've seen privet and autumn olive and rose resprout. It doesn't care, even if it's been cut from its roots. So I spray the stumps on both sides. Any questions about hack and squirt or cut stump? Yes, go ahead.
What do you use for dye and how do you mix it?
Yeah, Joey, will you grab that dye? So the brand I like is called Liquid Harvest Laser. I get it on Amazon. There's other options out there too. Turfmark Blue is another brand. A little goes a long way. And it will wash out of clothes, but it is very potent blue. So just a little bit goes a long way. I like to buy the gallon size or smaller because they're easy to pour. If you go much bigger than that, it's easy to spill. Thanks, y'all.